Before every great story of triumph, there is always a beginning that seems ordinary, almost quiet. Joseph's story begins not with power or victory, but with the simple beauty of a boy living among his family in the land of Canaan. He was 17, full of youthful wonder, with a heart that seemed to listen to something beyond what eyes could see. Life around him was simple, flocks grazing, tents scattered across the fields, evenings filled with the warmth of the fire and the voice of his father, Jacob, telling stories of faith and promise. But even in those peaceful days, an unseen purpose was already taking shape, one that would carry Joseph far beyond the hills of his home. Jacob loved his son dearly, not because of favoritism alone, but because Joseph reminded him of Rachel, the love he had never forgotten. Every time he looked into his son's eyes, he saw the reflection of his past joy and his deepest loss. That love wrapped Joseph in protection and tenderness, but it also drew the watchful eyes of his brothers. Affection, when seen through envy, can become a wound, and within the hearts of his older siblings, a slow bitterness began to form. They saw Joseph not as a brother to cherish, but as a rival for their father's heart. Days passed under the bright Canaanite sun, and Joseph grew into a young man marked by gentleness and purpose. His spirit carried an unusual calm, as though he already knew that his life would not remain confined to the familiar pastures. His brothers often noticed the way he observed the sky, lost in thought, as if the heavens whispered secrets to him. They mocked him quietly, not realizing that their teasing would soon give way to resentment. Jealousy began to cast long shadows over their family, turning moments of laughter into silence that lingered between them like an invisible wall. Joseph, however, did not allow bitterness to find a place in his heart. He continued to serve his father faithfully, bringing him reports from the fields, doing what was asked of him with sincerity. His honesty was mistaken for arrogance, and his innocence for pride. But within him lived something unshakable, a quiet faith that the dreams stirring in his heart were not random thoughts, but glimpses of a greater destiny. Every night when he looked at the stars, he felt that his life was part of a story much larger than himself. Those dreams would soon draw him into a journey that would test everything he believed. From the outside, Joseph's life seemed simple, even predictable. A shepherd's son among many, tending flocks and learning the ways of his people. Yet destiny often begins where no one expects it, hidden in the routine, born from the unnoticed moments of faithfulness. The same boy who walked barefoot through the pastures would one day walk the marble halls of Egypt. The same son who faced rejection would become a source of salvation for his family and for nations. His story reminds us that even when life feels ordinary, heaven may be writing something extraordinary behind the scenes. Joseph's journey was just beginning, a story of dreams, faith, and redemption that would inspire generations. If you enjoy hearing stories like this, filled with hope, wisdom, and truth, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support helps these messages reach more hearts and reminds others that even the darkest paths can lead to divine purpose. A morning unlike any other arrived when Jacob called Joseph to him with an expression of joy that illuminated his weathered face. From within his tent, he brought forth a garment that shimmered in the sunlight, woven from threads dyed in deep blues, warm golds, and rich crimson hues. It was a coat unlike anything seen among the sons of Jacob, each color speaking of love, pride, and promise. Jacob draped it across Joseph's shoulders with hands that trembled slightly, for this was not just a gift of fabric, but a declaration of affection, a visible reminder of his heart's favorite. The vibrant cloth fell gracefully upon Joseph's frame, and for a moment the world seemed to pause, bathed in the glow of that fatherly gesture. As Joseph stepped outside wearing his new coat, The beauty of it captured every eye. The brothers, who had long felt overshadowed by their younger sibling, saw their unspoken fears confirmed. The shimmering garment reflected the light of Jacob's love so intensely that it blinded them with anger. It was as though the coat proclaimed what words had not. Joseph was the chosen one. He was the one their father cherished most, and they could no longer ignore it. The colors that should have symbolized unity and celebration instead became the canvas upon which jealousy painted its bitterness. Jealousy is a quiet fire at first, but it feeds on comparison and soon devours peace. The brothers found themselves watching Joseph with increasing resentment, every movement of that coat fanning the flames within their hearts. They noticed how Jacob's gaze lingered on his favorite son, how he asked Joseph's opinion before theirs, and how he trusted him with tasks he would not entrust to others. What had begun as envy turned into a bitterness that distorted love into hostility. The once playful teasing among brothers grew sharp and cold. Each time Joseph walked through the camp, his coat flowing behind him, whispers followed like shadows. Laughter fell silent when he entered, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. The air carried tension heavy enough to make even the servants uneasy. Joseph, still pure in intention, wore the gift with gratitude, unaware that every step he took in that coat deepened the wound in his brothers' hearts. He did not boast, but neither could he hide what had been given to him. It clung to him as both blessing and burden, marking him as special in ways he never asked for. Days passed, and Jacob's affection continued to pour toward Joseph. When the brothers went to distant pastures, Jacob worried most about the son wrapped in the multicolored robe. He would often send word, asking about his welfare, as if Joseph's well-being alone secured his peace of mind. The brothers saw this too, and the anger within them matured into something dangerous. Their father's favoritism had created a fracture that love no longer seemed able to heal. The coat became more than fabric. It became a symbol of division. Its beauty was undeniable, but beauty without humility can draw hate, and favor without fairness can stir rebellion. Each color, stitched into its fabric, seemed to remind the brothers of their father's partiality. They saw themselves fading into the background, forgotten by the man whose approval they once craved. Their hearts, once filled with youthful laughter and shared memories, now hardened with silent rage. Joseph continued his daily tasks, serving faithfully and speaking kindly to all, unaware of the storm gathering around him. When he dreamed at night, he still felt God's presence, still sensed that his life held deeper meaning. But the same gift that made him stand out before heaven now made him stand apart on earth. The robe that carried his father's blessing became the very thing that set his brothers against him, and though he did not understand it, the colors that once brought joy would soon be stained by pain. That coat, shimmering in the light of Canaan's sun, was not merely a garment. It was destiny taking shape. What appeared to be an act of love became the spark that would set Joseph's life on a course he could never have imagined. The story that began with favor was quietly preparing for betrayal, and every thread in that garment would soon unravel to reveal a purpose far beyond the reach of envy. Night fell softly across the land, and as Joseph lay beneath the blanket of stars, his mind drifted toward the visions that filled his sleep. He began to dream of fields where sheaves of wheat stood tall, golden, and ready for harvest. In that dream, his own sheaf rose upright, while those of his brothers gathered around and bowed low before it. The scene shimmered with meaning, though he could not yet grasp its full weight. When morning came, his heart burned with excitement. The dream felt alive, as though heaven itself had whispered a secret into his soul. When he told his brothers about it, their eyes hardened instantly. His voice was innocent, filled with wonder rather than pride, but their ears heard only arrogance. "Do you think you will rule over us?" they asked, their tone laced with mockery. The dream was dismissed with laughter, though behind their words simmered anger that grew heavier each day. The vision had pierced their pride, exposing their fear that the favoritism of their father might indeed point to a greater destiny for Joseph. Another dream followed soon after, even more astonishing. This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. When he shared it, the tension deepened. His father rebuked him gently, questioning whether even his parents would bow before him. But within Jacob's heart, a quiet thought stirred. He had heard the voice of God in his own youth. He knew that divine dreams were not to be dismissed lightly. Though outwardly skeptical, he kept the matter in mind, wondering what purpose God might be shaping in his son. The brothers, however, were not capable of such reflection. To them, Joseph's dreams were an insult to their dignity, an unbearable reminder that the one already favored might also be chosen for greatness. The idea that their younger brother could one day stand above them wounded their pride beyond repair. Every word Joseph spoke after that was weighed against those dreams, every smile interpreted as a sign of superiority. Their laughter turned hollow, their eyes cold, their hearts restless with jealousy that would soon demand action. Dreams are often misunderstood by those who do not share them. What is holy to one may appear foolish to another, and what God plants in secret can be despised by those blinded by resentment. Joseph did not understand that his visions were not meant to glorify himself, but to reveal a divine pattern unfolding through his life. His youth and honesty made him eager to share what he saw, unaware that revelation can also be a test. Each dream carried a message far greater than he could perceive, and though his brothers mocked him, heaven was already arranging every detail. The fields, the stars, the bowing figures, all of it spoke of a future that would be shaped through suffering and endurance. But for now, those dreams became the final spark that turned quiet jealousy into open hostility. In the stillness of that season, destiny began to move silently. Joseph's dreams were not accidents of imagination. They were glimpses of what would one day be fulfilled. His family could not see it, blinded by pride and pain. But through those visions, a plan was being revealed, one that would eventually save them all. For every dream that meets disbelief, faith is tested, and Joseph's faith was only beginning to be refined. Early one morning, Jacob called Joseph and asked him to go check on his brothers who were pasturing the flocks near Shechem. The request was simple, born of concern, yet it would send Joseph on a path that would forever change his life. He set out wearing the coat his father had given him, carrying food and greetings. His heart was full of hope, unaware that the journey would end not with reunion, but with betrayal. The sun rose high as he traveled through the fields, his thoughts wandering to the dreams that had filled his nights. When he reached Shechem, his brothers were nowhere to be found. A stranger told him they had moved on toward Dothan, and Joseph continued his search without hesitation. The distance was long, but his steps were steady. As he came near, the brothers saw him from afar, the colorful coat glimmering against the landscape. It was all they needed to ignite their hatred. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them said bitterly. The words carried poison, and within moments their envy turned to deadly intent. They gathered quickly, whispering among themselves, their anger spilling into cruel plans. Some spoke of killing him and throwing his body into a pit, claiming a wild animal had devoured him. Others hesitated, uneasy with the thought of bloodshed. Reuben, the eldest, urged them not to take his life. He suggested instead that they throw Joseph into a pit, intending secretly to rescue him later. But the decision they made, though sparing his life, still crushed his spirit. When Joseph arrived, smiling with innocence, they surrounded him. The words he spoke were swallowed by their rage. They tore the coat from his body, the same garment that had fueled their jealousy, and threw him into a dry pit. The ground beneath him was hard and cold. Above, he saw faces once familiar now, twisted with hatred. He called out, pleading for mercy, but his words were met with silence. What had once been a bond of brotherhood had been shattered by envy that had festered too long. The brothers sat down to eat as though nothing had happened, their laughter echoing against the walls of the pit. From below, Joseph's voice reached them faintly, a painful reminder of what they had done. Their hearts should have been moved by compassion, but jealousy hardens even the softest soul. When a caravan of Ishmaelite traders approached from Gilead, carrying spices and goods bound for Egypt, Judah proposed they sell Joseph instead of killing him. The plan appealed to their greed and quieted their guilt. They pulled him from the pit, his clothes torn, his body trembling, and handed him over to the merchants in exchange for silver. The weight of the coins in their hands felt like victory, though it was the price of betrayal. The caravan departed, and with it the boy who had dreamed of greatness disappeared into the horizon. Dust rose behind the camels, slowly fading into the distance until he was gone. Reuben returned later and found the pit empty. His cry of anguish pierced the air as he tore his garments, realizing what had happened. The brothers quickly devised a lie to cover their actions. They dipped Joseph's coat in the blood of a goat and brought it to their father, saying they had found it on the road. Jacob's heart broke as he recognized it, believing his beloved son had been torn apart by wild beasts. His mourning filled the camp for days without end, while the brothers watched in silence, burdened by guilt they could not undo. Joseph, meanwhile, traveled with the traders toward Egypt, his mind filled with questions that had no answers. The familiar hills of Canaan vanished behind him, replaced by endless sand and foreign tongues. The betrayal had cut deeply, yet within the pain, a hidden thread of destiny was already weaving his future. What appeared to be loss was the beginning of transformation, and though Joseph could not see it, the hand of divine purpose still guided his path. Dust clung to Joseph's skin as the caravan pressed deeper into the wilderness. Each step away from Canaan felt like a slow unraveling of everything he had ever known. The voices of the traders were foreign, their laughter harsh, and the chains around his wrists heavy reminders of what had been taken from him. His heart wrestled between disbelief and despair. The boy who once dreamed beneath the stars now trudged behind camels under a scorching sun, stripped not only of his coat but of his freedom. Though grief sat heavily upon his chest, something within him refused to break. Beneath the sorrow, there remained a quiet certainty that his life was not over, that purpose still lingered somewhere beyond the horizon. Arrival in Egypt brought a flood of unfamiliar sights and sounds. Towering stone walls, bustling markets, and the scent of spices filled the air. The traders paraded their captives before potential buyers like livestock, calling out their strengths and prices. Joseph's youth and composure caught the attention of Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's service. Without hesitation, the man purchased him, unaware that the transaction before him was part of a story orchestrated far beyond human understanding. Joseph was led to Potiphar's estate, an elegant dwelling surrounded by palm trees and servants who moved with precision under the authority of their master. Life as a servant in that household began with quiet observation. Joseph studied the routines, learned the language, and quickly adapted to the rhythm of Egyptian life. His diligence distinguished him from the others, and his presence seemed to bring order wherever he worked. Tasks that once felt foreign soon became opportunities to serve faithfully. Each day he reminded himself that while his circumstances had changed, his integrity would not. Those who watched him noticed something uncommon in his manner, an inner peace that did not falter even under pressure. Potiphar, recognizing his reliability, gradually entrusted him with greater responsibilities until he placed the entire household under his care. Wealth and power surrounded him, yet his heart remained humble. The success of Potiphar's estate grew remarkably, and those within the house began to attribute this prosperity to Joseph's presence. Wherever he worked, things flourished. Fields yielded abundant harvests, servants cooperated more willingly, and disputes seemed to dissolve. Potiphar himself marveled at how this young Hebrew slave brought harmony into his home. He began to see in Joseph something divine, a quiet blessing that went beyond skill or intelligence. Although Joseph's position rose, his spirit never grew proud. Each night, when the noise of the household faded and the desert wind whispered outside, he prayed in silence. He remembered his father's face, the rolling fields of Canaan, and the dreams that had once filled his heart. Those visions felt distant, but not forgotten. In that land of idols and pyramids, he remained steadfast in his faith, clinging to the truth that his life still rested in divine hands. Challenges continued to arise as jealousy and suspicion followed his success. Fellow servants whispered behind his back, irritated that a foreigner had earned such favor. Still, Joseph treated each person with respect, never retaliating or seeking revenge. His consistency built trust that could not be easily shaken. Potiphar's household prospered because Joseph worked not for recognition, but from conviction, knowing that his integrity was his only true possession. Though far from home and living among strangers, he carried within him the memory of his father's teachings and the presence of a God who had not abandoned him. Every trial became a forge that strengthened his faith. The betrayal of his brothers, the humiliation of slavery, the long days of servitude, all became steps in a mysterious ascent towards something greater. Without understanding it, Joseph was being prepared for a future that would require not only wisdom, but endurance, humility, and unwavering faith. Days in Potiphar's house passed swiftly, filled with work and quiet victories. Joseph's competence drew admiration, but admiration has a way of attracting attention that tests the soul. Potiphar's wife began to notice him, not just for his diligence, but for his strength and grace. Her eyes lingered longer each day, her curiosity growing into desire. She saw in him something rare, a man of purity in a place where indulgence ruled. Her fascination deepened until she could no longer conceal it behind polite conversation or casual glances. The atmosphere within the house shifted subtly. What had once been an environment of trust began to feel heavy with unspoken tension. Joseph, aware of her advances, avoided being alone with her whenever possible. Her persistence, however, knew no boundaries. On several occasions, she spoke openly, trying to lure him with promises of pleasure and secrecy. Each time he refused, his words steady and his gaze unwavering. He explained that to betray his master would be a sin not only against Potiphar, but against God himself. His conviction frustrated her pride, turning attraction into bitterness. Temptation often disguises itself as opportunity, but Joseph's heart saw beyond the surface. He understood that one moment of weakness could destroy everything he had built, everything entrusted to him. Integrity to him was not an abstract virtue, but the essence of who he was. Though alone in a foreign land, unseen by family or friends, he lived as if the eyes of heaven watched every thought. His refusal was not born of fear, but of devotion. The day came when the test grew more intense than ever. Potiphar's wife found him alone inside the house, no other servants nearby. She reached for him, grasping his garment, her voice filled with command rather than persuasion. Joseph fled instantly, tearing himself free and leaving his outer cloak in her hands as he ran outside. His only thought was to escape before sin could entangle him. The moment became a symbol of his character, purity not maintained by chance, but by deliberate choice. Humiliation quickly followed righteousness. Scorned and enraged, she twisted the story, crying out to the other servants that Joseph had tried to assault her. Her voice trembled with false indignation, and when Potiphar returned, she displayed the garment as proof of her lies. Her words dripped with deception, painting Joseph as a villain in a story born of her wounded pride. Potiphar's face hardened as anger surged through him. Though suspicion lingered in his heart, perhaps sensing that his wife's account was not entirely true, he could not ignore the accusation. His reputation demanded swift action. Without trial or defense, Joseph was seized and thrown into prison, condemned for a crime he had not committed. The fall from favor was brutal, but even as the prison doors slammed shut, Joseph's spirit remained steadfast. He had chosen what was right and suffered for it, but within that suffering lay honor. Integrity had cost him his position, yet it preserved his soul. Alone in the darkness, he prayed once more, surrendering his pain to the one who had never left him. Though stripped of freedom again, he carried within him a freedom that no accusation could take away. Cold stone walls surrounded Joseph as he adjusted to life in the prison beneath Pharaoh's authority. The air was damp, the corridors narrow, and the cries of other inmates echoed through the night. For many, such a place would crush all hope, but Joseph refused to let bitterness take root. He had been betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and now confined unjustly, yet despair never consumed him. Deep within his heart lived a quiet certainty that purpose still breathed within those dark corridors. Each morning he rose before the guards called his name, determined to serve faithfully even in chains. His conduct caught the attention of the warden, who soon noticed the same spirit Potiphar once admired. Order followed Joseph wherever he went. Disputes among prisoners quieted in his presence, and his calm demeanor brought an unusual peace to the cells. Gradually, the warden placed responsibility into his hands, allowing him to oversee daily tasks. Even in confinement, Joseph's leadership flourished, proving that true greatness does not depend on circumstance. Faith continued to sustain him. Every hardship had become a lesson in trust, every disappointment a deeper call to perseverance. He spoke gently to those around him, offering words of comfort to men who had lost everything. To the broken and forgotten, he became a light in their darkness, reminding them that even behind bars, dignity could survive. Through his kindness, the atmosphere of the prison shifted from despair to quiet resilience. Time passed, and one day 2 new prisoners arrived, a cupbearer and a baker from Pharaoh's household. Both had offended their master and were cast into confinement. Joseph was assigned to attend to them, and over time they began to speak with him about their fears and regrets. One night, both men were troubled by dreams they could not interpret. They awoke distressed, unable to find meaning in what they had seen. When Joseph noticed their sorrow, he asked gently why their faces were downcast. Upon hearing their dreams, he listened intently, trusting that the same God who had given him dreams long ago would provide the interpretation. To the cupbearer, he explained that the dream foretold restoration. He would be returned to Pharaoh's service within 3 days. To the baker, he revealed with compassion that his dream signified death. Both interpretations came to pass exactly as spoken. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him once restored, to speak to Pharaoh on his behalf so he might be released. The man agreed eagerly, full of gratitude. But as freedom returned to him, memory faded quickly, and Joseph remained forgotten in the shadows. Days turned into years, and still Joseph waited. Though forgotten by men, he was not abandoned by God. The silence of that waiting became a place of refinement, shaping his patience and deepening his wisdom. Each passing season strengthened his understanding that divine purpose does not rush according to human timing. Hope endured quietly, like an ember that refused to die. Through solitude and disappointment, Joseph learned to rest in trust rather than demand answers. What seemed like stagnation was preparation. What appeared as loss was hidden progress. Behind those prison walls, his spirit was being shaped for leadership far beyond imagination. Every trial had carved humility into his heart. Every delay had built endurance into his character. What began as captivity was becoming the foundation for destiny. The dreams of his youth had not been forgotten. They were simply maturing in silence, waiting for the appointed time to unfold. 2 years passed within the confines of stone and silence before the tide of destiny turned again. One morning, distant footsteps echoed through the prison corridor, and a guard called Joseph's name with unusual urgency. Pharaoh himself had been troubled by dreams that none of his wise men could interpret. The cupbearer, suddenly remembering the Hebrew prisoner who had once revealed the meaning of his own dream, told Pharaoh about him. Summoned from the depths of confinement, Joseph was hastily washed, shaved, and dressed in clean garments before being brought into the royal court, where gold and grandeur surrounded him. The air was thick with tension, for even the most powerful men of Egypt had failed to bring peace to Pharaoh's mind. Standing before the ruler of the world's mightiest kingdom, Joseph bowed low. Pharaoh described his dreams: 7 healthy cows devoured by 7 gaunt ones, and 7 plump ears of grain swallowed by 7 withered ones. The imagery was vivid, unsettling, and filled the court with murmurs of confusion. When Pharaoh finished, Joseph spoke with calm reverence, declaring that interpretation belonged not to men, but to God alone. Through divine wisdom, he explained that both dreams carried one message. Egypt would experience 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. He advised Pharaoh to appoint a discerning overseer to gather grain during the plentiful years and store it for the days of scarcity that would follow. A hush fell over the court as Pharaoh studied the young man before him. None of his priests, magicians, or scholars had been able to make sense of the dreams, but this Hebrew slave had spoken with clarity that pierced through confusion. Recognition stirred within Pharaoh's spirit. He saw not merely intelligence, but the presence of something divine. Turning to his counselors, he asked, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom the Spirit of God resides?" The question was rhetorical, for he already knew the answer. Without hesitation, Pharaoh placed his signet ring upon Joseph's finger, arrayed him in fine linen, and set a gold chain around his neck. The journey from dungeon to palace was complete in a single day, a transformation so sudden it seemed impossible. Once bound in chains, Joseph now rode in Pharaoh's second chariot, with heralds proclaiming his authority through the streets. Crowds bowed before him, unaware that this man, clothed in Egyptian splendor, had been a slave only hours before. His name was changed to Zaphenath-Paneah, and a wife was given to him from among the priestly families of Egypt. From the shadows of injustice, Joseph had risen to become second in command over all the land. Though power and luxury surrounded him, his heart remained anchored in humility. The years of servitude and imprisonment had stripped him of pride, teaching him that true greatness rests not in position, but in faithfulness. As he oversaw the collection of grain during the years of plenty, he worked tirelessly, remembering the faces of his brothers, the tears of his father, and the dreams that had first set this journey in motion. Storehouses filled with grain until the sand itself could not measure the abundance. Egypt prospered under his guidance, and his name became a symbol of wisdom and foresight. 2 sons were born to him during those years of prosperity. He named the first Manasseh, saying that God had made him forget the pain of his father's house, and the second Ephraim, for God had made him fruitful in the land of his affliction. Their names reflected his journey. Pain transformed into purpose, suffering turned into strength. Though far from Canaan, his soul remained tethered to the memory of home and to the faith that had carried him through darkness. As the years of plenty passed, the land flourished under his careful hand. But Joseph knew abundance was not permanent. He continued to prepare, ensuring every city had enough stored grain for the famine he knew would come. When the first signs of scarcity began to appear, his foresight proved true. Fields grew barren, rivers thinned, and hunger spread across neighboring lands. Egypt alone stood ready, a refuge amidst desolation. Pharaoh's trust in Joseph deepened, for he saw that divine wisdom had indeed guided this man from a foreign land to save a nation. When people from distant regions arrived seeking food, Joseph's preparations became the difference between life and death for thousands. His faith, refined in hardship, had blossomed into stewardship that now sustained nations. He had once dreamed of sheaves bowing before his own. Now, rulers and travelers from across the world came to Egypt, humbling themselves before him without knowing the prophecy they were fulfilling. The dreams of his youth had begun to unfold in ways far greater than he had ever imagined. Hunger spread through Canaan like an invisible storm, stripping the land of sustenance and forcing Jacob's sons to seek grain in Egypt. News of abundant stores reached their ears, carried by travelers who spoke of a powerful Egyptian official overseeing the distribution of food. Unaware that this man was their long-lost brother, they journeyed across the desert, driven by necessity and faint hope. Their arrival in Egypt stirred memories long buried in Joseph's heart. When he saw them bow before him, just as his dreams had foretold, emotions surged within him so fiercely that he struggled to maintain his composure. Years of separation had transformed Joseph's appearance. The boy they had sold was now unrecognizable, dressed in royal garments, speaking the Egyptian tongue, and surrounded by guards. His brothers, kneeling in the dust, saw only a powerful stranger. Their act of submission fulfilled the prophecy that had once provoked their hatred, but they did not realize it. Joseph recognized each of them instantly, though his face betrayed nothing. He spoke through an interpreter, testing their hearts with questions that pierced their conscience. He accused them of being spies sent to uncover the weakness of Egypt. They protested their innocence, explaining that they were 12 brothers, the youngest left behind with their father, and one who was no more. Hearing those words broke something within Joseph, but he concealed his emotion and devised a plan to see whether time had changed them. He imprisoned them for 3 days before sending them home with grain, keeping Simeon as collateral and demanding they return with their youngest brother Benjamin to prove their honesty. The journey back to Canaan weighed heavily upon them. When they found the silver they had used to buy the grain returned to their sacks, fear struck their hearts, convinced that divine judgment was following them. Jacob, upon hearing the account, refused to part with Benjamin, his last link to Rachel. Only when hunger grew unbearable did he relent, sending his sons again with gifts and double payment. The brothers traveled once more to Egypt, unaware that the storm of revelation awaited them. Upon seeing Benjamin, Joseph's composure faltered. The sight of his full brother stirred emotions he could no longer suppress. He invited them to dine with him, seating them in order of their birth, a detail that filled them with confusion. Benjamin received a portion 5 times larger than the others, a gesture that tested whether jealousy still ruled their hearts. To Joseph's quiet relief, they showed no bitterness, only gratitude. A glimmer of reconciliation began to form, though he continued to conceal his identity, needing to see the depth of their repentance. When they prepared to leave, he ordered his silver cup to be placed in Benjamin's sack. Once they departed, his steward pursued them, accusing them of theft. The cup was discovered where Joseph had instructed, and the brothers were brought back, trembling before him. Judah stepped forward, offering himself as a slave in place of Benjamin, unwilling to cause his father more grief. That act of selflessness pierced Joseph's heart. The same men who had once sold him now stood ready to sacrifice themselves for his younger brother. The transformation was undeniable. Overwhelmed by emotion, Joseph sent everyone else out of the room. Tears fell freely as he revealed his identity, speaking to them in their native tongue. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Shock and fear seized them, for the weight of their guilt suddenly returned. They expected punishment, perhaps even death, but Joseph's heart was filled not with vengeance, but compassion. He reassured them with trembling voice that what they had intended for harm had been turned into good, for through their betrayal, lives were now being saved. He embraced each of them, weeping loudly enough for the servants outside to hear. Reconciliation washed over them like rain upon dry earth. They spoke together long into the day, and Joseph instructed them to return home quickly to bring their father and their families to Egypt, where he would provide for them during the remaining years of famine. The past, once a wound that defined their lives, became the doorway through which forgiveness entered. The reunion between Jacob and Joseph was one of the most tender moments ever witnessed. When the old patriarch arrived in Egypt, leaning upon his staff, Joseph went out to meet him in his royal chariot. As their eyes met, time seemed to collapse. The years of loss, the nights of grief, the ache of separation, all dissolved in a single embrace. Father and son wept together until neither could speak. Jacob's heart, once resigned to sorrow, now overflowed with joy he thought he would never feel again. Life had been restored to him through a son he had believed dead. With his family settled in the land of Goshen, Joseph's role as both ruler and protector deepened. He provided food, land, and safety, ensuring that his father's household lacked nothing. Egyptians revered him as a savior of their nation, and foreigners recognized the divine favor that surrounded him. Though he wore the robes of authority, his heart remained anchored in compassion. The power he wielded did not corrupt him. Instead, it became the instrument through which grace was multiplied. Years continued, and Joseph's wisdom guided Egypt through the famine's conclusion. The land slowly returned to fertility, and the storehouses that had once overflowed began to empty as grain found its way to those who needed it most. The lessons of scarcity humbled the people, teaching them gratitude. For Joseph, every act of distribution was more than an administrative task. It was a sacred duty. He had once been hungry and enslaved. Now he was the one feeding nations. Peace returned to the land, and Jacob spent his remaining years surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Before his death, he blessed each of his sons, prophesying the future of their descendants. When his time came, Joseph wept again, holding the hand of the man who had loved him more than life itself. He arranged for his father's burial in Canaan, fulfilling the promise Jacob had made him swear. The procession that carried Jacob's body across the desert was immense, a blend of Egyptian officials and Hebrew family, symbolizing how God's plan had woven two worlds together. After the burial, fear returned to Joseph's brothers. They worried that, with their father gone, he would finally take revenge for their betrayal. Approaching him with humility, they offered themselves as his servants, confessing their guilt once more. Joseph's eyes filled with tears as he assured them they had nothing to fear. He spoke gently, explaining that their cruelty had been the very tool through which divine salvation was achieved. What they intended for harm had become the means of preserving life. His forgiveness was not spoken lightly. It was born of years of reflection, pain, and divine understanding. His words carried healing that no punishment could provide. The brothers, once fractured by envy, now stood united by grace. Through forgiveness, the cycle of hatred ended. What had begun in deceit was redeemed through mercy, and the family that had torn itself apart found peace under the hand of the one they had wronged. Joseph's heart was finally free, no longer haunted by betrayal or longing. As time flowed forward, Egypt flourished under Joseph's continued leadership. His children grew, and his wisdom became legend among the people. He had learned that true greatness lies not in thrones or wealth, but in the capacity to forgive and to use pain as a vessel for compassion. His life had become a living testament that divine purpose can redeem every injustice, transforming tragedy into triumph. When he looked back upon his journey, from the fields of Canaan to the depths of the pit, from the chains of slavery to the seat beside Pharaoh, he saw a single thread running through it all: grace. It was grace that sustained him, guided him, lifted him, and shaped him into the man he had become. Forgiveness had not erased his past, it had redeemed it. Through that redemption, the promise of God to his forefathers lived on, unbroken, unshaken, and eternal. Years rolled gently across the land of Egypt, and Joseph's story became more than history. It became heritage. His wisdom had saved nations, his mercy had restored families, and his faith had proven that destiny can bloom even in the harshest soil. Age brought serenity to his countenance, but his eyes still held the same light that once looked up at the stars of Canaan. He had walked through valleys of betrayal and mountains of honor, and through it all, his faith had remained unshaken. Generations grew beneath his care, learning from his strength, listening to his counsel, and watching how grace could dwell even within power. Days of peace stretched into decades, and Joseph's legacy continued to shape those around him. He was no longer merely Pharaoh's advisor, but a father, a mentor, a symbol of what it meant to trust beyond sight. His children, Manasseh and Ephraim, carried not only his blood but also his spirit of resilience and gratitude. He taught them that life's purpose cannot be measured by comfort, but by obedience to divine calling. The prosperity of Egypt and the harmony of his family were living reflections of a man who never allowed suffering to harden his heart. When Joseph walked through the cities he had helped preserve, he often paused to watch the people gather grain, the children playing in streets once empty during the famine. Every smile reminded him that pain had not been wasted. Each act of kindness he witnessed became evidence of redemption that reached far beyond his own lifetime. What had begun as a story of betrayal had ended as a testimony of grace. The land that once enslaved him had become the stage where divine faithfulness was revealed in its fullest measure. His faith never wavered, even as his hair turned white. Surrounded by his family, Joseph often spoke of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, reminding them that their home was not Egypt, but the promised land that awaited their descendants. He carried within him a longing for Canaan, the soil of his childhood, where his father and forefathers rested. That longing was not born of nostalgia, but of spiritual vision. He knew that God's promise stretched beyond his lifetime, beyond the borders of nations, beyond the limitations of human understanding. When his final days approached, Joseph gathered his family close. He looked into their faces and saw the continuation of a covenant he had only begun to understand. He reminded them that the God who had delivered him from the pit, who had raised him to power, and who had preserved their lives, would one day lead their descendants out of Egypt. He made them swear to carry his bones back to Canaan when that time came. His final act was not one of sorrow, but of faith, a declaration that divine promises never die, even when the dreamer's voice falls silent. His passing was mourned with reverence across Egypt, but among his family it was remembered with gratitude. He had lived not for vengeance or wealth, but for purpose. His name became synonymous with faithfulness, forgiveness, and wisdom. Pharaoh honored him with a burial fitting for a prince, while his people remembered him as a savior. Though his body rested in Egypt, his spirit looked beyond, toward the land of promise and the eternal hand that had guided him through every trial. Through generations, the memory of Joseph's journey inspired countless hearts to trust in divine timing. His story whispered through history a message that suffering is never wasted when faith endures, that dreams are not abandoned by heaven even when forgotten by men. From the dust of betrayal to the throne of power, Joseph's life became a living reminder that every valley is preparation for a mountain yet unseen. Those who heard his story learned that destiny is not built in moments of triumph, but forged in seasons of endurance. The world remembered him not as a ruler adorned in gold, but as a servant whose humility changed nations. His legacy endures because it speaks to the human soul, the assurance that faith in God transforms every hardship into a stepping stone toward fulfillment. Through Joseph's life, divine love revealed itself as stronger than envy, deeper than loss, and greater than the grave. Joseph's journey stands as a timeless reminder that even when life seems to unravel, purpose remains intact beneath every trial. His story teaches that no betrayal, prison, or hardship can cancel what God has designed. Every pain carries within it a seed of destiny waiting to bloom. His forgiveness broke generations of bitterness, and his faith turned slavery into salvation. When we look upon Joseph's life, we are reminded that grace can turn loss into triumph and sorrow into wisdom. If this story has inspired your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new reflections like this one. Like the video to show your support, and let us know in the comments what part of Joseph's story spoke to you most deeply. Share this message with your family and friends so that they too can be encouraged by the power of faith, forgiveness, and divine purpose. Together, let us keep spreading light, hope, and truth to the world.